The Houston Cougars and the Texas Longhorns join together for what's going to be a fun reliving of the Southwest Conference Days matchup, or at least we're hoping to have some fun. You try to have some fun? Fun? Jonathan, have fun? Fun? Ready? Let's jump on into it.
Fun.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a crossover edition of Locked On Coogs and Locked On Longhorns. I'm one of your hosts, Parker Ainsworth. I'm joined by Jonathan Davis of Locked On Longhorns. Jonathan, how are you doing? We're recording the evening. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing all right. I'm looking at the game. You know, we have a little Houston Astros, Texas Rangers rivalry going on right now. As I'm looking at this, recording this, we are down 5-2. So hopefully by the time you hear this, Texas made a miraculous comeback and we're up 3-0 in the ALCS.
I will say this is a Houston versus Texas week in a number of different ways, for sure. Obviously, this matchup this weekend, Houston versus UT. I guess y'all are probably saying Texas versus Houston. It's an old Southwest Conference rivalry. Our listeners might remember that more. Full disclosure, I was born in 1991, Jonathan. And I think you look younger than I actually don't know how old you are. Have you heard about the Southwest Conference days in this matchup? Because this is somewhat of a rivalry.
You know, I was born in 93, so I am indeed younger than you. And, you know, I will say that from older fans, you know, this was a game that meant something. I think to Houston fans and Texas fans, it's gotten so long that we've gotten away from it that I don't know if it has the same appeal this weekend, especially when you look at the point spread. But this certainly was a game, you know, back in the day that Houston fans and Texas fans got up for. And I think was really competitive between the two teams. So hopefully they can debunk the point spread put out by FanDuel, 22.5 points, and get the pads popping on Saturday, and we can have a good game.
Hoping to get some pads popping. And we're just going to yo-yo back and forth, folks. But I do want to ask you, Jonathan, so like to put in perspective, people have joked about like Houston could have gone 1-11 this year if the one win were Texas. I mean, because the only year they're in the same conference, with Texas going to the SEC next year, it means a lot to folks in Houston. Like it would have been great. Now they know Texas is good. I think England's like lying to themselves about that. What does this week mean to Texas? They're in a very different spot. They still have national title aspirations. They're coming off of a loss. It's been about 10 days at this point. What's the thought in Austin?
So I think this is a bigger game now that you did lose to Oklahoma, right? I think, you know, this could have been potentially a trap game. If you beat your rival, you come off a bye week, you're kind of coasting. You feel like you got through the toughest, you know, teams on your schedule in Alabama and Oklahoma. But now this has to be a get-right game, right? You have to prove that you're still a Big 12 championship contender. You have to prove that you're still a college football playoff and national championship contender. And unfortunately, Houston is the team in your way this weekend coming off that loss to Oklahoma. So, you know, I think this is a huge, you know, game for Texas this weekend because they lost to Oklahoma and they have to, you know, get back right? And they've had that feeling in their mouth for about 2 weeks now. So, you know, they have a chance to, you know, get back on the football field for the first time since that loss to Oklahoma, and I expect them to show up and show out on Saturday.
I listened to your show after Rivalry. I frankly really like that rivalry a lot. I've joked that I wish Houston had someone that they would meet halfway and have a stadium half full. Like the atmosphere is great, right? Yeah. In that game, it looked like Oklahoma took advantage of some things. Not that Houston has seen necessarily like they don't have the 350-pound linemen and stuff, but what did you notice that like scares you? What like holes in Texas did Oklahoma expose? Maybe even if they fixed them by now in that weekend.
Yeah, well, I think they, for the first time all year, really made Quinn Ewers uncomfortable. You know, we saw that maybe in the Wyoming game, but I don't think they made him uncomfortable. He was just missing throws. We saw the turnovers, you know, missing reads really kind of in the first quarter. And then after that, he was able to get back right. But 3 turnovers is 3 turnovers, right? And he had that crucial fumble. Another one is the red zone issues, right? And when you look at this Texas offense, statistically, they've been really good. Top 15 in terms of yards, top 30 in terms of scoring. But they're down in the 100s in terms of scoring touchdowns in the red zone. And, I mean, there's no better way to expose that than stopping them on the 1-yard line 4 straight times, right? So you talk about what Oklahoma exposed for sure. I think they exposed if you can get to Quinn Ewers and rattle him a little bit, he still can be a little bit turnover prone. I guess as we saw on Saturday, they exposed our red zone offense, which has been a problem all year. And I think you saw when Dillon Gabriel drove down the field in 71 seconds to win the game that, this is a defense that's been really good through 6 weeks. But, if you can put some pressure on them and limit that pass rush, you can make some plays in the passing game. And, Donovan Smith, who we'll talk about in a little bit, he was able to beat Texas last year. So, I think if you have a dual threat quarterback, Dillon Gabriel ran for 113 yards. You certainly can put some pressure on this Texas defense. But we've talked about Texas enough, and we'll talk about Texas a little bit more, right? Let's talk about the University of Houston, right? We talked about what happened the last time Texas took the field. I want to talk about the last time Houston took the field, right? On October 12th, Houston led West Virginia 21-17 going into the fourth quarter. And then the magic happened. So tell me, what were your thoughts watching that fourth quarter between Houston and West Virginia that ended with a Hail Mary touchdown for the Cougs to win their third game of the season?
So, third game of the season, Houston is the first new Big 12 team to beat an old Big 12 team. I guess I was reminded West Virginia is not that old of a Big 12 team, but it felt great. I have to say, Houston goes up 11 at one point in that fourth quarter. I believe it was 35
2017.
It's 2017. Then they both scored, so it ends up being 35-24 at one point. And I'm thinking we got it. It's like 7.5 minutes left. You're up 11 points, right? And frankly, West Virginia is not a pass-heavy offense. Of course, they proceeded to pass very well against us very, very quickly. And then honestly, it felt like when West Virginia scored with 12 seconds left, it's like, God, we blew it, right? Like we had it where we wanted. This is Dana's old school, right? Like we had it and we thought we blew it. And frankly, it felt like we blew it because we outplayed them for most of the game. Only to then turn around and in the final 12 seconds, they had like a little 8-yard out route to like cut the distance down some, and then ultimately threw a Hail Mary. The Hail Mary was a great play. It's the classic throw it to the 6'4" guy. He tips the ball back to the short, speedy guy to Boogie Johnson. Boogie Johnson's an Oklahoma State transfer, a guy who played some Big 12 football before. Great story, great kid, but really exciting to way to end it on a weeknight. Frankly, it made Saturday really easy and fun, man, because you got your win out the way Thursday night. We talked about it Friday, and we were good to go, right? Like that was it.
Yeah, the ideal scenario. And as we're talking, Jordan is up with the bases loaded. I'm trying not to. I'm trying hardest.
Speaking of ideal scenario,
my heart is bursting out of my chest as I'm talking on this podcast right now. You talked about how Texas will feel coming into this weekend, coming off of a loss. We saw the point spread, 22.5 points. Obviously there's really nobody outside of a small part of Houston, right? Maybe third ward that's expecting Houston to win this game. But how do you think the Cougars feel coming into this game off of a dramatic win like that? Do you think they come in with a ton of confidence and they say, hey, this is a home game for us? We put our, shoes and pads on just like Texas does. We can go out and win this game. Do you think that's the feeling in the locker room?
I think they've got the confidence for a number of reasons. To start, right, I think that Dana Holgorsen's got a winning record against Texas as a head coach from his time in West Virginia. Obviously, the one Sarkisian, that was very different. Texas is a very down decade for Texas. I don't mean to say it's the exact same situation, but like he's confident, right? And then Donovan Smith, you mentioned from a year ago. Donovan Smith had probably his best game as a college football player against Texas a year ago while he was at Texas Tech. He ultimately ends up losing the starting job later. And comes to Houston for games like these. He wanted to continue to play in the Big 12. They have a reason to be confident. I mentioned Boogie Johnson's a Big 12 transfer receiver, but Joseph Manjack, the guy that tipped it, is a USC transfer receiver. Like they've got guys that have played big-time college football before. I think the interesting thing will be, and you're in the city yourself, how much of that stadium really feels like a home field advantage? It's been kind of the underspoken thing. Houston actually ended up having a 7th home game this year. And then if you count Rice being a game in town, they actually played 8 games in the city of Houston on their schedule. But the fear has been that, there are a lot of Texas alums in town. And what will this game look like? How many orange shirts versus red shirts, et cetera? With a true home field advantage, I think that they really do feel like they have a chance to upset the world. And I don't mean to be pejorative here. Texas has shown in the last 15 years, like they let these kinds of games happen, right? They have lost games that they should win a lot in the last 15 years. And I almost wish, frankly, that they had beaten Oklahoma, like you're saying, because I feel like they'd be more likely. But I think that they're talking themselves into like, why not us, right? Why not us? We've seen these kinds of things happen in the past. Donovan Smith's like, I did this in the past, right? Now, speaking of winning and losing over the weekend. If you are the kind of person that wants to, like, maybe help yourself feel good over the course of the weekend, or hedge your bets a little bit, let's say, make sure you head over to FanDuel.com and use promo code LOCKEDON, because right now new customers get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed if you place a $5 bet. It's $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. If you're thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to join in on the action. Jonathan, the line for this game is 22.5. I will say I think it's going to be closer than that. 22.5 is a lot of points. Can we talk about one team we might agree on? That's the Houston Texans, because it's an NFL weekend. The NFL kind of drives a lot of these things. The Texans are only a 3-point favorite on the road against Carolina. That seems silly to me, man. What do you think about that one?
I definitely would hammer the Texans -3 on that one. The Carolina Panthers, the only winless team in the NFL right now. CJ Stroud has looked really good, looking like the best rookie quarterback. Obviously, prayers up. Hopefully, Anthony Richardson makes a strong recovery. But yes, I think that the Texans, with that defense and the way CJ Stroud is playing, and my boy Tank Dell on my fantasy team, shout out U of H, you know what I'm saying? I think they win by more than 3 points for sure.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, CJ Stroud is not just looking good for a rookie quarterback. He's looking good for a quarterback. I mean, he's really, really talented. Texans have it rolling. I'm saying go to FanDuel.com. I'm saying go put some money on the Texans and maybe hedge your emotions with this weekend for whichever side you're rooting for to make sure you can get some winning, get some cash on Sunday. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. So, Jonathan, I mentioned that I would have liked almost for Oklahoma to have blown it, maybe not throwing that final touchdown pass or what have you, right? Just to because I feel like it'd be easy to sneak up on this Texas team. Texas, though, and I mentioned in the past, in the pre-Sarkisian days, frankly, they lose games they shouldn't. Texas hasn't had that game this year where, like, they come out sluggish and slow that I can tell, right? I guess Rice has ended up looking, I think, better than people realized in the first week of the season.
Texas fans would tell you going into the fourth quarter tied 10-10 with Wyoming is looking sluggish and slow. Now, they do say when you play Bama that you feel it for 2 weeks. So maybe that's what it was. But I think that was the game, right?
So Wyoming, though,
in the fourth quarter.
Wyoming counts then, because that's what I was going to ask, is Wyoming has ended up being, they're something like 5-1 and their one losses to Texas. They beat Texas Tech. Does that count as the slow start? Is that the game you're talking about as far as, like, we got that game out of our system? Do you feel that way as a Texas fan?
Absolutely. Because when you come into the season, like I said, with the expectations you have, right? A championship contender in some form or fashion, Big 12, college football playoff, national championship contender, you just should not be tied 10-10 with Wyoming going into the fourth quarter with less than 100 passing yards for Quinn Ewers. And even, with that 40-yard touchdown he ended up with to Xavier Worthy, he still didn't have a spectacular day. So, you can look at it, after the fact and say, oh, they won by, 20 points or whatever it was. They scored over 30. They took care of business. But like I said, when you can go beat Bama the week before, when you can show the discipline to not commit penalties and go into a road environment like that against the GOAT Nick Saban with 100,000 people rooting against you and win that game the way that you did, then you should be able to come out and dominate Wyoming the next week. So, like you said, in the past, this could have been a trap game, right? A bye, you beat your rival, you overlook Houston, and the next thing you know, it's a tight game going into the fourth quarter. Luckily, they had that wake-up call 2 weeks ago. And now, like I said, Houston has to deal with them. But if Houston has any room for confidence, it's at their quarterback position. Because last year, Texas Tech did beat this Texas team. And Donovan Smith was one of the biggest reasons why, right? With his arm and his legs. And Joey McGuire just going crazy, going for it on 8 fourth downs, right? So, maybe Dana Holgorsen has that in his bag this week, right? Donovan Smith, 1,797 yards and 17 touchdowns this season. Like I said, Houston is 3-3. And what was their win total coming into the season? I remember we talked about it. Like, they only had to win 4 games to cover.
Over under is 4.5.
Like
yeah, so 4.5.
Oh, it's 4.5. Okay,
yeah,
so they have to win 5. They'll win 2 more. But I want to ask you, what has Donovan Smith meant to this offense this season? And what type of game do you expect him to have on Saturday? Maybe a better question is, what type of game does he need to have to beat the Texas Longhorns 2 years in a row?
So, honestly, I love and I have loved the growth of Donovan Smith. I think some people, so they came out and played UTSA week 1. I think UTSA is better than people realize, better than people talk about typically, right? And they put up like 2 touchdowns. And we're like, okay, we had a Big 12 quarterback. We only scored 2 touchdowns. It's a very different system than McGuire ran at Tech. He's very much been adjusting. But like the second half against Rice, they reeled off 35. They lost the game, but they reeled off 35 unanswered points, right? And then in the second half, I guess, into the second quarter, in the second half against West Virginia, he throws 16 straight completions, including the Hail Mary to win the game, right? Like theoretically, he's shown development, shown improvements. Obviously, every college quarterback is flawed, and obviously, there's a reason he didn't ultimately win the starting job at Texas Tech. I will say my fear coming into the season was he threw a lot of picks at Texas Tech, and this year, to avoid throwing those picks, he's kind of holding on to the ball a little bit, right? And I think that's just the yin and the yang of it. But I really have enjoyed his growth as a quarterback, and I think the big thing for me has been he's taking what the defense gives him a lot better now. He's taking the short throws, he's taking the short stick routes, checking it down, and just letting his athletes make plays. And frankly, to beat Texas, playing sound football like that, like knowing when to check it down, knowing when to throw it out of bounds, knowing when to take a sack versus throwing it away, those are all important decisions because you can't give Texas extra possessions, right? That offense is too strong. And so I've liked where that's going. What do you remember about, I mean, you saw him a year ago. What scares him on your side?
Well, I would just say, yeah, just that dual threat. Like I said, Dylan Gabriel ran for 113 yards. You were able to do a really good job against Jalen Milroe, right? You thought that he would be the one that would run all over you. And of course, you didn't have to face Jalen Daniels dealing with that back injury. So, I think that would just be, what would scare me this weekend against Donovan Smith, right? Is that he should, if he's playing a great game, have the answer to all the questions, right? It's hard to take away everything from a dual threat quarterback. If he's on with his passes and he's on with his legs, how do you take away both at the same time? So if he's making the right decision, making the right reads, taking off, when there's nothing there, not going broke, taking a profit, picking up first downs with his legs, really putting pressure on that Texas defense, driving down the field, challenging our depth, right? Making them defend, 80 yards, 90 yards on the field, long play drives. Then I think that's the way for, Houston to beat Texas. You talked about how every quarterback is in college is flawed, maybe besides Michael Penix Jr., right? And so, who's leading the Heisman race right now. And so, I think that in a game like this where you're a 22.5-point underdog, the quarterback is always the equalizer. If Donovan Smith, like he did last year, can come out and have the game of his life, Houston certainly can keep this game closer than 23 points. But we're talking about defense, and the Houston one is not good, right? I looked up the stats, and 107th in scoring defense, allowing 31.3 yards per game, 116th in total defense, allowing 429 yards per game. This Texas offense has had struggles in the red zone, but between the 20s, they're elite. So what does this Houston defense need to do to stop this Texas offense in Quinn Ewers on Saturday?
Well, I almost joked about, we said struggles in the red zone. I guess it's like, maybe we just let them get to the 25 and see what happens. No, I think the real deal has been, and it was interesting that West Virginia didn't happen this way. We started, and I love Dot Nwankwo. Chidozie Nwankwo played a great game against West Virginia. He's a really good football player. He's a 295-pound nose tackle, right? Like at the end of the day, like it is a game where size matters, and I think that we've seen you see your eyes open up, you're bugging out. Like
295-pound nose tackle.
Hey, he's all everything wrestler, man. Like I'm not fighting him anytime soon. But I think the deal is you see teams wear through it because it takes so like the energy and like playing 70 plays as a 295-pound nose tackle in the Big 12 takes a lot more energy than it does to be a 350-pound nose tackle, right? And to do that, like you start going to your depth, and the Houston depth gets really young real fast. And so you see over the course of the game, like Texas Tech, Houston's playing well in the first half. Second half, they just wear down, right? You saw it against TCU in the first half. It was close. It was a 7-point game at halftime against TCU. Second half, TCU opens it up, right? That depth is key. So frankly, helping yourself out by getting off the field feels really, really important. Houston's had and forced a handful of turnovers in the secondary, like a handful of picks. Blake Fleming leading the way there. But obviously, there's some aspect of, if you're going for turnovers and picks, you're gambling some. And if the ball goes past your head on those picks, you got a problem. I do like our pass rush. Nelson Cease is really good. I mentioned Dot Nwankwo. He's a really good nose tackle. He's just not very big. I like our pass rush. I like our guys. We're just not as deep as some of these teams.
Yeah, and you talk about that, Jonathan Brooks, starting running back for Houston at this point. The young boy, my boy Josh Young, just hit his second home run of the game. Too bad we're still down 3 runs, because when I told you Jordan was up with the bases loaded earlier, he actually brought 2 in. So, It's 7-4. I'm keeping up with it. You see us maneuvering, looking at the TV,
well, you
right?
keep
While we're
looking
recording.
at the side of the screen.
Yeah. Jonathan Brooks, one of the leading Doak Walker candidates at this point, one of the best running backs in the country. We thought it would be hard to replace Bijan, and we just picked right up. And you talked about having a 295-pound nose tackle. Kyle Flood has really emphasized those big humans, right? And I think our smallest offensive lineman at this point might be 310 pounds, right? So that's definitely, like you said, where that, matchup can be won. And, I think that if this, Texas offense can, just run the ball and continue to run the way that they have in pretty much almost every game this year, then, like I said, I just think Houston will wear down, after a while, even if it is close in the first half.
You mentioned the run game, and in a somewhat, I'm hoping for a transition here, Bijan Robinson is now making money playing football. And if you're looking to hire people for your team that are going to make the kind of impact that a Bijan Robinson has made for Atlanta or for Tank Dell in Houston or any of these other guys playing at the next level for money, you got to make sure you go to LinkedIn.com to find that kind of hire. Because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business or pro football franchise. They're not very small. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, like Bijan or Tank. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Now, I don't know if they're Tank Dell or Bijan Robinson fast, but they're pretty darn fast. Again, LinkedIn Jobs, you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. And it's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So that's not just a segue to talk about LinkedIn. I do want to ask about replacing one Bijan Robinson because admittedly, you watch them much closer than I do. Like I said, I like the Red River Rivalry, and I watch, whenever they're on, I think they're bowl game. They played Washington last year. Whatever, right? Replacing Bijan Robinson and getting better at offense seems antithetical to me. How has that happened? What's going? How do you replace? Frankly, they had two pro running backs and get better on offense. That just doesn't seem real.
Yeah, well, I think everybody around them got better. I think coming into this year, you look at Quinn Ewers, he already has matched his touchdown total from last year in 4 less games. His completion percentage is up over 10%, I believe. When you look at Steve Sarkisian, I think he's doing a better job of managing the game and calling plays. The receiver core has been better. Obviously, bringing in Adonai Mitchell, a 2-time national champion. I always got to make sure I mention that. And then the tight ends are better as well, right? JT Sanders was always a dog in that top 3 conversation at the position in sports. But Gunnar Helm has really stepped up as a second tight end. And he's been able to make some explosive plays this year. What's crazy is our tight end room is averaging 19 yards of reception. It's like a Travis Kelce type room. They're putting up Travis Kelce type numbers right now. So I think that everybody around, I think everybody around the running back position has been better on offense, and that's why they've been really good. But certainly, Jonathan Brooks has been no slouch this year. Now, I do think that we need to find more production from our running back too. You talked about Roschon Johnson being a running back, a 4th-round pick last year in the draft, and this year we've been kind of slow, right? Between Jaden Blue and Cedric Baxter, not a lot of production, but Jonathan Brooks in the passing game has made up for a lot of that, right? So it's hard to replace Bijan Robinson, but they've done a good job of that so far. But speaking of replacing, right, coming into the season, Dana Holgorsen was on the hot seat, and now the Houston Cougars are 3-3. So halfway through the regular season, what is the pulse of the fan base about Dana Holgorsen? Do you think he's the coach of the future, or is it still a wait and see on a week-by-week basis?
Personally, I'm still a wait and see. I got listeners, I can already hear them typing and commenting right now. Fired. I get comments every day asked to fire Dana. I will say that I think the deal is they want the 1980s days. They want to. We talk about Southwest Conference to open the show. They want to go back to Andre Ware winning, being the best team in the state of Texas, etc. And I at least recognize that that's not a light switch away, right? It takes some time. Realistically, getting to a bowl this year in your first year in the Big 12 would be fantastic. TCU's first year in the Big 12, I've kind of looked at them as a blueprint. They went 7-6 after 4 tremendous years in smaller college football, right? They go 7-6, and then a handful of years later, they're fighting to win the conference, and a handful of years later, they're fighting for a national championship. We don't talk about what happened in the game after that. But I will say that, in the transfer portal, you could kind of expedite that blueprint a little bit. And kind of if you get to bowl eligible your first year, it could take a few years, but you can theoretically get there. The ultimate resource being, can you recruit Houston? Right now, the recruiting class 2024 has The kids that have committed are well ranked, but there have only been 8 commitments, and it looks like there are a bunch of kids waiting and seeing to see what happens over the course of the season. And so I think that adds an extra layer of pressure to Dana, right? I got to admit, when West Virginia had their Hail Mary go through the other night, the look on Dana Holgorsen's face was that of someone who's about to get fired. And I don't know what's being said behind the scenes, but he looked like, I just lost my job. Like he just like looked like it on his face, and that's a bad look to have. Anyway, I have to say what's interesting to me though is every time I talk to someone that's not from Houston, they seem to think Dana's good. So as someone who had to play against him for 7 years in the Big 12 when he was at West Virginia, what does Texas think of Dana? Is there any thought about Dana at all on that side?
That we can win this Saturday and then cover. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if there is a thought. That's the thought, right? that we can get right this week. That Houston came at the perfect time for sure. So speaking of that, we're getting to the end of the show. So I'm now going to ask you: Texas minus 22.5. The $1 million question. I ask this on every crossover: who wins and who covers?
So I've been talking myself into Houston winning all week. I will say that truthfully, I came into the season assuming they'd beat Oklahoma and that Houston could catch them, right? That obviously didn't happen and would make the catching them aspect of that a little bit harder. I do think, though, there's a world that Donovan Smith plays lights out again. He played so well in the second half against West Virginia. It feels like just keeping it rolling, I would imagine this is a high-scoring game, and frankly, for Houston to have a chance, I feel like it has to, because we're not going to keep that offense in a low-scoring game. I could see this being a game in the 40s that Houston wins. I could see this being a game that's 40-20 that Houston does not. I think 22.5 is a lot of points, though. So for our FanDuel folks, I feel like if you're going there, I feel like Houston at plus 22. I feel like if you add 22.5 points to Houston, they're going to win the game. I don't know how many more, but adding 22.5 to Houston, I feel like it's a lot of points. You feel very confident. Frankly, you'll have big goals, bigger than just this weekend. What do you think when you see 22.5?
All right, so I'm going to hedge this by saying I've been wrong all season, and this is part of the reason why I stopped gambling, right? It's made watching sports a lot more fun. Imagine if I had money on the Rangers right now and I just watched 3 straight Astros reach base, right? While I'm listening to him talk about Texas maybe slipping up this weekend.
Straighten my hat up here, yeah.
I said that Texas was going to lose to Alabama and Texas beat Bama. I said that Texas was not going to cover against Baylor. They covered. I said that Texas was not going to cover against Kansas. They covered. I said that Texas was going to cover against Oklahoma. They obviously did not. So I am 0-4 on these predictions, right? And 0-3 when I pick against Texas in some form or fashion. Texas wins. Texas covers. We lost to our rival. We are fighting for our life, theoretically, right? If a 5-1 team could be fighting for their life. We know that we could not lose another game this season. We have had to deal with that loss for 2 weeks in one of the biggest rivalries in sports, that bad taste in our mouth. We've been on Twitter listening to Oklahoma fans, the corniest fan base in sports, talking about it for the last 2 weeks. This Texas team is ready to get on the field. They're ready to play. Now, I could be way wrong with my prediction, but I think Texas barely covers. If you can barely cover 22.5, 41-17. Texas wins. Texas covers. Your thoughts on my potentially erroneous prediction? I can't go 0-5, right? I can't be that bad, right? I can't be 0-5.
My thought is, I love that you open with, I've been wrong all year, and I'm picking Texas winning. That was enough for me. That was Jonathan, you've been talking about the matchup all week, and frankly, Texas football at large all week. Where can people find you and the work you do?
Yes, sir. They can find me at John Zoball, like Lonzo Ball, on Twitter with the J. Prayers up to my brother. We'll see him in 2024, hopefully. And then they can find me at Locked On Horns on Twitter, Locked On Longhorns, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find me at the Big 12 championship game when Texas hopefully beats Oklahoma in the rematch. Now, I will say, for Texas fans and Houston fans, if you've made it this far in the show, I meant to say it earlier, but it just didn't flow that way. Our starting right tackle, Christian Jones, will be on the podcast tomorrow, Locked On Longhorns. Texas fans, of course, you want to check that out, hear from one of the football players, talk about the season, talk about, Houston, the matchup, and some other things. But also, Christian Jones is a Houston area native, right? He's from Cyprus. I know, so there's gonna be some Houston people that comment Cyprus ain't Houston. You know, he's from the Houston area. So you have a reason to check out Locked On Longhorns tomorrow too. So like I said, you can find me at Jonzo Ball on Twitter, Locked On Horns on Twitter, and Locked On Longhorns wherever you get your podcast. Christian Jones, starting right tackle for the Texas Longhorns, will be on the show tomorrow. Please check it out.
I was going to ask with Lonzo's injury, it was going to become Jello Ball at some point, but I don't.
Nah, I'm loyal to the soil. I was watching summer league games when Lonzo got drafted. Like I'm talking about tapped in. You know what I mean? So whether his knee works or not, you know, I'm not changing. I'm not changing that.
Yeah, gotcha. My knees don't work, but I'm at Ainsworth 512. There you go. Yeah, I'm at
the Texas fans know where they can. Yeah, let them know where they can spam your comments. You know, because you halfway said that Texas is going to lose on Saturday. You know, Texas fans might be the most arrogant bunch in the country, so they're coming for you. Let them know where to find you.
Completely. And I went to middle school and high school in Austin. I will say, and I saw it firsthand. I will say that I'm sticking my preseason prediction, right? And I mentioned that like the season's played out a little differently. But I'm at Painsworth 512 PAINSWRTH 512, like Parker Ainsworth, and then 512 on all social media handles. I guess I still call it Twitter. It's Mama's call it Twitter. But Blue Sky, all Instagrams, all of them. Christian Jones will be interesting. Cy Woods is a good program that I'm interested to hear from. I just pulled him up to see when you were talking which high school he went to, and he's 320. So when we talk about undersized guys, that's the kind of thing we are talking about with 320-pound right tackle. We're going over here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Again, the CrossFit things are fun. I wish y'all were in the conference. I'm going to keep doing this more often. We'll talk again in basketball season for sure, right? I mean, those will be fun matchups too.
Yes, sir. I can't wait for that. I can't wait to see Rodney Terry and my boys come down to Houston and hopefully get a win against the Cougs for sure. But now this is super fun. You know, I think this is the second or third time we've done it. And hopefully everybody can stay, you know, safe and healthy on Saturday and we have a good football game.
For sure. All right. Go Cougs, man. Go Cougs.
Hook 'em.